Hey everybody, I'm Will. I'm a Colors Moonshine Post. This will be kind of a crash course on color grading. I know we're probably at kind of different levels of familiarity with Resolve and with color grading in general, so you won't have to know anything in particular about Resolve. This will be a lot about fundamentals and setting up like a good, strong workflow. I want to start off just by asking how many of us have used Resolve? Have you guys played around in the color page at all?
I just did like the beginner guide that they have on the Blackmagic website.
Sweet, that's awesome. Yeah, that's a great resource. So I want to ask you guys what you guys think some of the goals of color grading might be.
To set the tone of the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aesthetics.
Yeah, form the aesthetics.
Yeah.
You guys nailed it. Here was my list. There's a ton of reasons. Define the style and aesthetic. You guys said that. Create visual consistency. Yeah. Correct technical issues. So if it's like a documentary, they might have had some underexposed stuff, denoising, things like that. Make the client happy, and then tell the story. You know, everything should be reinforcing that story. I'm going to start just by jumping into Resolve and giving kind of an overview. For those of you not familiar with how Resolve is laid out, we've got all these tabs at the bottom here. Let me just make sure. Yeah. And this kind of goes through the series of post-production. This first tab, this is like the media tab. So you can see this is all the files on my computer in the top left here. And then down here are the actual media that we've imported into the project. And so that's kind of how you'll get media in when you're starting out. Then we have a cut page. This is for editing. And it's kind of laid out like Final Cut Pro, where it has like a magnetic timeline. That's kind of what it's inspired by. There's this edit page. This sort of layout will probably be really familiar to you if you've used Premiere. We have Fusion, which I don't know a ton about Fusion. It's a whole world. It's for visual effects. We have the color page, which is where we'll be spending basically all of our time today. So I'll skip over that just for a second. We have Fairlight. This is for audio. It's got some really powerful tools in here for audio mixing. And then the delivery page when we're ready to actually render it out. This is where we have all of our render settings and things like that. So you'll see in the color page, we have all of our clips here in this little strip, and that is directly corresponding to our timeline. Basically all throughout Resolve, you can click on these different icons to open and expand different things to kind of tailor your workflow. So when you don't need a certain panel, you can get out of your way. Like for example, if you're just working on one clip for a while, you can get rid of that strip there and you can see your viewer a little bigger. Here we have our node tree, and this will probably be the biggest learning curve coming from other types of editors. Is how the nodes work, but it's actually really simple once you get to know it. For the most part, you can basically just think of them as layers. Once you are doing some more advanced things, it'll give you a few different options for mixing these nodes together, which can be really awesome, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Down at the bottom, this is all of our edits. So what I have up right now is the primaries palette. This is kind of the bread and butter of color grading. You can color grade an entire film only using the primaries palette. It's extremely powerful. Back in the day, with the days of film, you would essentially, it was called color timing, and you would soak the film stocks in different chemicals to adjust the color. And what you were doing is this offset control. And so this just adjusts your entire image, it tints it, and then you can push and pull it, essentially exposure up and down. And that was the only control that people had for a really long time. So with the primaries palette, you get a bunch of other controls. So it's actually really, really powerful. There's lift, gamma, and gain. So you can kind of broadly think of these like shadows, midtones, and highlights. You can shape your palette really well with that. Because they're so broad, it's really hard to create artifacts in the image using these, which is why they're a great place to start. I'm gonna start with this third one, saturation. So saturation increases the colorfulness of the image. And then I'm gonna jump back to the beginning with this color boost, because people get kind of confused with saturation and color boost. Essentially, saturation increases all of the most saturated colors and saturates them, whereas color boost will take all of the least saturated colors and saturate them. Primaries palette, super awesome. Then there's all these tabs here. So if I click through them, these are all the different tools that are available in Resolve. So curves is a big one. I'm sure you guys are familiar with curves from other programs, but kind of down here, we have control of our shadows, here midtones, and then here highlights. This is great because I mentioned that the primaries palette is really, really broad. Well, the curves is as specific as you want it to be. So there's all these different panels that do different things. We'll jump into kind of the core ones throughout this. but I won't touch on everything in Resolve. Resolve's super, super powerful. You'll notice as we go through, there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing. So that makes it a lot easier to learn because you're like, oh, okay, like this feels like this, but with just a little bit of a different way of doing things. A lot of people can have like their personal preference of what tools they like to reach for. Down here we have our scopes. So scopes are really useful. They essentially give you a visual representation of the image, but in like a graph form. Once we're actually going to grade, you will, you have your nodes here, and these images come through in log, right? And so they come through really flat from when the camera shoots them, so it retains all of that value. And so, maybe if I want to go ahead and add some contrast to it to kind of make it look a little bit more normal, I could create a node called contrast and kind of play my gain and my lift, and I can bring in a little bit of saturation. And so now we're starting to kind of work the image into a place where it's feeling a little bit better. Essentially, when we're getting into, working in Resolve, it can feel like very nebulous because there's so many different directions you could go. And so I think a good way to fix that is to provide like a structure of like, okay, these are the things you should think about first and the directions you should go. Here are like the 4 main steps of color grading. So we have color management, look development, your primaries, and then your secondaries. Here's the core issue that we have to solve here is cameras, sensors can see a lot more light and a lot more data than our displays can reproduce. So a camera can capture a huge amount of colors, but our display technology can only show a very finite amount of them. The idea of color management is to target the specific camera that we're using and then convert that into the display, which most displays are Rec. 709 for SDR content. That's like pretty much ubiquitous. So that's kind of like the most simple form where we slap it on and it gives us kind of a correct starting point. But I'm going to show you in Resolve a better way to do it, which is through DaVinci Wide Gamut. This is a graph of all colors that humans can see. The smallest one here is Rec. 709. So that's what most displays can show. So you can see this issue where we've got a ton of data that we need to compress into a smaller amount of data. Now, this huge triangle that goes over everything, that's DaVinci Wide Gamut. And so we're going to essentially take all of our cameras, we're going to put them all into DaVinci Wide Gamut, so we have the maximum amount of flexibility, and then at the end we're going to compress that down into our display. Our first node is going to go from our log, so say if it's a Sony, it'll be slog3 to DaVinci Wide Gamut. Then we're in DaVinci Wide Gamut, and then this is where all of our grading happens. So that contrast node that I added, that saturation node that I added, that'll all be there. And then our very final node will go from DaVinci Wide Gamut to Rec. 709. Let's take a look at it in Resolve so you can see actually how to apply all this stuff. And then I'm going to open up this FX panel right here. This is a whole bunch of effects that Resolve comes bundled with. We're just going to drag and drop that. Color space transform is the name of that effect. I just dragged and dropped that onto our node. So now we're looking at our image in DaVinci Wide Gamut. So that's what RE-Log C4 looks like. That's what DaVinci Wide Gamut looks like. This technical base is really important to be able to see our images in the best way possible, where it goes like, oh wow, that actually looks really good. And the grading feels a lot more rewarding when you have everything set up properly. There's before, there's where our image came in at, and then there's where we are now. Yeah, we're gonna have just a beautiful base for our images. I'm gonna show you guys one more thing with this. So this color space transform, it looks really good on images that are balanced properly, but it can have some issues on other images, like if you have like a neon tube or something like that, it can like start clipping and weird things can happen. So there's a LUT that's freely available online. I'm just gonna jump in here. It's called Referent. You just put in your name and email and you get it for free. LUTs are, a lot of people have different opinions about them. Essentially, they just do anything to the image. Like I could, do some lift gamma gain changes. I could do some saturation changes, and I could save that into a LUT and apply that to another image, and it would do those exact same things. For something like going from DaVinci Wide Gamut to Rec. 709, where you just want it to do the same thing every time, a LUT's actually a great way to do that. Look development is something, when we're actually building the look for our film, we want it to not only apply to the clip that we're looking at, we want it to apply to all of our clips, either in all the clips in a specific scene or in our whole timeline. I'm going to select the first shot in the scene, and then I'm going to hold Shift, and then select the last shot in the scene. So you can see we've got all of those shots selected. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to do add into new group. If I do the drop down, the only two options are clip and timeline. Timeline is going to apply whatever grade you do to every single shot. So like if I do something where I tint everything blue, every single shot in the timeline is all going to have that blue tint to it. Now I'm just going to jump back to clip. If I go to one of our shots in our group and I go to that drop down, now we have these two options, group pre-clip and group post-clip. So we're going to do our look development in the group post-clip. And it's because we want our look to apply to all of the shots in our scene. So now let's actually dive into talking about look development. I'm going to break it down into different elements. I want to encourage you guys to try different things. There's all sorts of different YouTube videos and things like that for like how to create cool looks, and a lot of those work really, really well. But here's some ideas, like first places to think of when I'm building a look. Number one, I'm going to say contrast. Our eyes are a lot more sensitive to changes in light than they are to changes in color. If you have an hour to build a look, like I might spend half that time just massaging that contrast, making sure that contrast is feeling really good. Split toning is going to be the idea of putting one color into the shadows and another color into the highlights. So a lot of times what films are doing is putting like cooling down the shadows and warming up the highlights. Saturation, so globally, you know, if the look is going to be in black and white, maybe we go 0 saturation with it. Maybe it's like a flashback and we want to kind of lower the saturation a little bit. Maybe the look is super bright and colorful and we want to go a little higher with the saturation. So saturation is good to think about. Now hue shifts, so that's going to be like if we want to push our blues a little bit more towards cyan, or we want to warm up our greens, we're kind of manipulating where hues are living. And then density, which is going to be how bright or dark a specific color is. Now let's jump into resolve and do some look development. When you're doing look development, you don't want to get too glued on to one particular shot because this is going to apply to all of the shots in the sequence. You want to make sure it carries well across all of those. Our first thing will be our contrast. Tons of different ways to add contrast. You can do some work with the contrast pivot here. So this will just add some contrast, and then pivot will make that contrast apply either more into the highlights or more into the shadows. For look development in particular, I like to use the curves. So if I hold Alt and I click this curve, you'll see I'm able to add a point to the curve without actually adjusting anything. And you can see this little graph down here. This is a histogram, so it shows the distribution of the light across your image. And I want to kind of add a point kind of in the middle or just after the middle of where all of our data is. That'll give us control to the left of that anchor, that'll give us control of the shadows, and to the right of that anchor, control of the highlights. I think for most projects, you want your color grading to be felt, not necessarily noticed, but you'll see we'll have a very big impact on the image. And then we can look at our highlights. So we can raise our highlights a little bit, get a little bit of extra dimension out of there. And you can see in those lights up there how I'm kind of softening them out. So that's before and that's after, just looking up at these lights here. This is kind of generally called like an S curve because this makes like the shape of an S where our shadows are going darker and our highlights are going brighter. Basically each node would be kind of like one thing. Like I could come in to our primaries palette and increase our saturation and add some contrast all in one node. But then it makes it hard to see, each specific component. Like if one of those adjustments is doing something that you don't like, it's really hard to dive into the node and figure out exactly what it is. It's much easier if each node is just doing one thing. So that is what's going to allow us to do our split toning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Alt again and put an anchor on kind of around the middle of our volume. And then we're going to adjust the color balance of our shadows versus our highlights, because that's what split toning is pumping one color into our shadows and another color into our highlights. I'm gonna remove some red. That is gonna be cooling down those shadows. So you can see before and after, looking pretty good. I'll jump into my blue channel now, and I'm just gonna take away some blue in the highlights. So the opposite of blue is yellow. So that's gonna be adding some yellow into the highlights. I'll do quite a bit of that just to show you as I toggle this on and off. You can see some more yellow going in. So that's before, and then that's after. Contrast and split tone is probably 85% of your look as far as like the actual impact to the eye. We'll jump into saturation. Saturation, overall colorfulness. We've talked earlier, we got our primaries palette with the saturation slider in our primaries palette. So if I go ahead and take that to 0, if we want it to be black and white, that would be one way to make the image black and white. But if I increase saturation here, you'll see that things start to look kind of strange and kind of like video-y. And that's because of the color model that this saturation slider is using. Really quickly, there's additive color models, and then there's subtractive color models. So additive is where it's like how a screen works, where the more saturated a color gets, it's adding more and more light because there's a backlight to the to those pixels. And so as it's getting more colorful, it's getting brighter, which is what's creating that colorfulness. And especially in her skin, where it just like she looks like orange and almost like she's like popping off the screen in an unappealing way. If we jump into our color slice effect, we also have a saturation slider here, and this is using a subtractive model, where when a color gets more saturated, it's getting darker. But if I do just a tasteful amount, you can see before and after, it's still probably too much, but it looks night and day better than the additive. We're gonna be able to compare and contrast different options. So I'm just gonna right-click our image and do grab still, and then I will reset our saturation here, and then add back our saturation in our primaries palette. And then if you click this button, it's going to wipe whatever still you have selected. If I do image wipe, now I'm able to wipe between those two, and I will just make this image a little brighter, a little larger, so you can see this is with our additive saturation, and that's with our subtractive saturation. I definitely think those skin tones are more natural, and the overall image feels a lot better. That's our saturation, and then I'll just select all three of these, so our contrast, our split tone, and our saturation, and I'll toggle those on and off. So there's our before, and there's our after. So next, back to our kind of overall list of look development elements here, second to last element is going to be our hue. Seems pretty good where hues are at in this image, but let's say we wanted to adjust like these cyans in the background. Still staying in our color slice where we added that subtractive saturation, we have control over every single vector. So we have a section for red, a section for yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta, and then we have the skin tone section. For look development, I would recommend staying away from the skin tone stuff because it's a very fine adjustment. So that's better to do on a shot-to-shot basis. If I go into our cyan here, and then there's this hue slider, I can start spinning it, and you'll see I just spun it towards green. So there's where our cyans were living before, and then there's after being a little bit more towards green. So I said to avoid skin, but you can use red and yellow to kind of broadly adjust the skin. This 709 transform usually puts skin in a really good spot, but I think it's for this image, it's feeling pretty good. All right, so our last look development element is going to be density. Density we're also going to do in this color slice section here. Density is how bright or dark a color is in your image. So like let's say again with these cyans, we could kind of darken them. So I'm just going to full screen. You can see her cyan sweater on the left. So before and then after. It's only grabbing those most saturated parts of it, so it's kind of subtle. But that's where this kind of order of operations makes sense, where it's contrast is the very, very broadest thing, and then by the time we get to density, it's really just little tiny things at the end. This is kind of our look. So we've got our 5 nodes that have built out our look. So before and then after. I think this definitely has a lot more character, a lot more style to it. And these elements, there's an infinite number of ways that you can adjust them. And this is applying to, as we've said, all of our shots. And oh yeah, so here's why it's important to look across different things. Now this cyan color has gotten really dark, and it didn't necessarily look bad on this shot, but over here, I think this has gotten a little bit too dark, particularly in this shot. So that was that density I did there, so I'm just going to roll that back a little bit. There's a perfect example of why it's important to bounce around and really have a broad view when you're doing the density adjustments.
Is this built all on top of the referent LUT as well?
Yeah, so the referent LUT is still applying. This is where that LUT is, and that's our very last node in the sequence. So if I disable that, you can see this still has all the look stuff on, but now it's, now we're viewing it in the dimension-wide gamut space, whereas with that LUT on, we're viewing it in Rec 709. So you'll see each of these kind of build onto each other, and this is like the order that you should be doing things is like color management first, then tackling look development and like your very broadest look-based things, and then you'll see we'll jump into clip-to-clip corrections next. Now let's talk about primaries. So primaries are going to be corrections that you make shot to shot. These are adjustments that affect our entire image. Broadly, what we're going to be looking at is exposure. So if one shot is way darker than another shot, we'll want to use exposure to balance those out. Contrast, which we set our contrast for our whole scene, but maybe one shot is a little bit, like if we're pointing this way, it's a little bit more contrasty, pointing the other way, it's a little bit less contrasty, and we want to balance those out. That's adjusting contrast. Our white balance, so if a light shifted, if the sun changed and the temperature of the shot actually changed, that's going to be white balance. And then overall saturation. And the goal of these primary grades is to just make things match. This scene was good for looking at for look development because things were pretty consistent. But let's jump into a scene where things are a little bit different, which is going to be this exterior scene right here. So just as before, I'm going to select all of our shots. I'm going to right-click and add them into a new group. This is an important note. With look development, you don't necessarily have to have all of those elements. You can have a really great look that's just a contrast curve, and then you get going shot-to-shot corrections, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm just going to add a little bit of contrast in so we have a little bit of a consistent look going on shot-to-shot. And now we can talk about our primaries. So you'll see when they were shooting this, this is pretty underexposed. So we can already see we're going to have some work to do. Here, this shot is leaning pretty cool. And then as we keep watching through, this shot is also feeling pretty cool. Then now all of a sudden this shot's very bright and very warm. I'm just going to do Alt-S to add a new node, and then first thing we're going to look at is exposure. What I'm going to do really quick is build out a template node tree. So essentially that's going to be all of these nodes are, we apply this to every single clip in our scene, and then we have nodes that are just ready to go for each of these adjustments. So for exposure, and then I'm going to do contrast, and then I'm going to do balance, which is white balance, and saturation. And then I'm going to Command C, select all of our clips in our scene, and then Command V. So now none of those nodes are actually doing anything, but they're good placeholders for each of the adjustments that we might want to make to each of these clips. Exposure, we can do through our primaries palette, like maybe with offset or something like that. But my personal for doing where it's a shot that is like underexposed in camera, I think it works a little bit better if we jump into this HDR palette here. And the only thing we're going to be looking at is this HDR global. And we see there's this exposure dial here. And I like this because it works in stops. So if you guys are used to working with cameras, like aperture stops, it's like the exact same sort of deal. If I change exposure to 1, that's going to add 1 stop of exposure, and that is the exact same as opening up your aperture by 1 stop. And that's why it's so great, because you can kind of respect the original photography a little bit better. You know, this is supposed to be a little bit of a lower key scene, so it's okay to leave it a little bit darker, and then you can see there is a good bit of noise in here. I think that's a pretty good level. So there's before and there's after with adjusting our exposure. I'm gonna skip over contrast for a second, because I think our balance is quite off in this shot. We've got a pretty strong like magenta lean. And so similarly with exposure, this global adjustment right here will adjust your white balance exactly the same as adjusting your white balance in camera. So if you're at 5600 Kelvin and you want to warm the image up, you go to 4500 Kelvin, it'll look exactly the same here as if you did it in camera. There's 2 ways to do it. There's this wheel in the middle where I can add kind of whatever color I want, or there's these here that will go from like magenta to green, or from warm to cool. And this little button here just resets whatever I did. So it's a little bit, this is leaning a little bit too magenta, so I'm just gonna take it away from magenta just slightly. And these are things where, you know, you'll want to watch it in context and jump back and keep making little tweaks till it's feeling really good, but we'll call that pretty solid for now. So now if I just toggle before, after, our shot's definitely in a much better spot. And now if we jump into our next shot, this one's also a little bit underexposed, so I'm just gonna give us some exposure with that same global wheel. And I just played backwards there into the previous shot so I can see how that cut's feeling. It's JKL to do, J plays backwards, K pauses, and then L plays forwards. So it gives you a little more control than just stop pause. So I think our exposure's feeling pretty good there. I'm gonna go into our white balance and just give us a little bit of warmth to help that cut feel a little better. So from there to there, you can already see how much better that cut's feeling. So now seeing this, I kind of feel like this shot is a little bit too heavy on the contrast. So I'm gonna jump into our primaries palette that we were looking at earlier. I'm just gonna pull out a touch of contrast. And then I kind of back up in this shot and play through, see how that's feeling. I think that's feeling a little bit better. So this is kind of what we're doing with our shot-to-shot corrections, is the look has been set in our look development side, and then now we're just making things flow as we go through. So I'll just play through, and then here's where our shot where it's much, much brighter. You can already see that cut feels way better with our exposure adjustments, but I still do think this shot is a little too bright. So I might just pull it back some. And then in our contrast, I'll maybe just go to our gain, which is our lift gamma gain. So it's shadows, midtones, highlights. I might just pull our gain down a little bit, which is going to bring down that sky. But you can see lift gamma gain is very, very broad, so it also brought them down quite a bit. So I'm going to lift up our gamma to compensate, to try and just target only those highlights. So now before and after, rolling in those highlights a little bit. That's how we're using our exposure, contrast, balance, saturation to balance those shots to make them match together better. And that's kind of bread and butter of doing primaries. Does anyone have any questions on any of that?
Is this something that you previously learned, like when you were in school, or did working with moonshine like develop the process to what it is now?
Yeah, we're definitely working with moonshine has developed this, because there's just so many things where you need to be more efficient, and most people their like first instinct is to just kind of park on the first shot and grade the shot to completion and go on to the next shot and then grade the shot to completion. This workflow, we're kind of grading the whole film at the same time. And so it gives you like a much more bird's eye view of all of your shots.
How long does it usually take you to do all of this?
So for a feature film being like, let's say it's like 90 minutes, it depends on how many shots are in it. So a 90-minute film could be 700 shots, or it could be like 2,000 shots. So obviously there's a time difference there. We bid out 5 days of work for a feature. That's not necessarily like we start on Monday and the film's done by Friday. Usually what we're doing is getting the client in for a look development session where I'm doing those contrast split tone and we're setting looks for each scene. Spend a few hours doing that, and then I take a couple days to do a full pass just on my own, and then we're gonna send off like a file for them to review and they can leave notes on. So, maybe that's Monday, Tuesday, we're building looks, then let's say Monday we're building looks, and then we take 2 days to do a full pass of the film. So now Wednesday, the film has the first pass done, and then they usually take like a week to give notes on it. So now we're paused on that project for like a week, and then addressing those notes might take half a day or a day, and then they come in for a final where we look through the notes, watch it all down. That whole process typically takes around 5 days.
How many projects do y'all usually take on at a time?
Yeah, so we have 12 people, and it really just depends on how busy we are. There's definitely slow periods, especially with how the industry has been. But we have anywhere from like, at various stages, we could have like 15, 20 projects going on. We have 2 colorists, we have 2 editors, we have a VFX artist, we have online artists. So there's all sorts of different people doing different things. And we do all sorts of stuff. We do a lot of indie features, we do commercials. I worked on the latest season of America's Most Wanted. I did a mini docu-series for PBS Nature. So it's a whole variety of different things.
Have you ever done like color assist work, or can
Oh,
you
yeah.
explain color assist versus color artist?
Yeah, so a colorist would be, and it really changes depending on where you are, but a colorist is like where you're actually doing, all the color grading. A color assist, you could, set up the project. So JP's our senior colorist at Moonshine. I pretty much set up all of his projects where I'm grouping scenes, putting on our default node tree, getting things from log to Brick 709 and set up for him to work in DaVinci Wide Gamut, all that sort of stuff. And then depending on the film and the turnaround, he may like set a look for a scene and then I grade through the scene based on his look. I may, take a scene and grade it, and he takes a scene and grades it, and we're kind of working in tandem. It really just depends on like how I can best support him at the time.
Of your pet peeves of having to, or given a project.
Oh yeah, like what are the biggest issues? Well, so there's things that we can change really easily in color, like exposure problems or white balance problems. We can really easily do that stuff. But issues where like a light has physically moved or a shadow comes in, that stuff we really can't do much about. Maybe VFX could do something, but I think some clients will come in thinking that we've got like magic wands and we can, make anything happen. But yeah, sometimes they're disappointed and it's like, well, this is really the best we can do. Like this was something that needed to be addressed on set. Now let's talk about secondaries. So primaries affected the entire image. We were doing exposure, changes every pixel. We're doing, things that affect the entire image. Secondaries are only going to affect a portion of the image. And so there's kind of two main ways to do that in Resolve. It's through power windows, which like in Premiere, I think it's called like a mask. And then there's qualifiers. And with these two things, we can do a ton. This little window section is where power windows live. And you can see there's all sorts of different shapes. Most of the time I'm using circles because circles just kind of like look the most pleasing and you can blend them in the best. But you can see I've got this circle here, and if I make some sort of big change, like if I add a ton of gain to it, you can see I'm only adding gain to that section of the image. And that's kind of the idea of secondaries. This center window, if I scale it up and down, you can make it bigger and smaller. Then there's these two concentric rings, and that's the softness. So if I grab this, I can make it softer. And most of the time, I'm softening it out a lot because I don't want you to actually know that I put a circle on the image. You want it to kind of blend into the scene. Maybe I'm doing, a circle around somebody's face, and I'm just gonna hit this little drop down right here and turn this off so we can't see the window anymore, but I'm still using the window. It just changes it for the viewer. And maybe I can add a little bit of contrast, a little bit of shape to her face. So before and after. So that's windows. Some of the ways that we might use them, we might do a big broad window like this, and I might hit this little button right here which inverts it. So now rather than doing the middle of the window, we're doing the edges of the window, and then do kind of like a curve down. And that would add like a vignette. This is so strong that you would definitely notice it, but a really subtle vignette I'm doing on most images just to kind of draw the eye. You want to think about like if there's something really bright and distracting in the corner, bringing that down and drawing your attention to where you want the viewer to look. Here's a shot where we may want to do a vignette. So I think our face is looking pretty good, but we could darken down the background a little bit. So add a little window in here. I'm going to invert that, do a little curve down, and now the background level has come down, so now the brightest thing in the image is her face. So that kind of makes it pop out a little bit. Then the other thing that we have is qualifiers. Let's say we wanted to make her jacket, make it less saturated so it's kind of like less distracting to the eye. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up our qualifier panel, which is this little pin dropper icon. And then I've got this pin. I'm just going to select on the image. And then if you hit this button right here, this highlight tool, that's going to show you what you're selecting. So I just clicked once, and that's sort of the selection we got. And this is basically doing a selection, only selecting a certain range of hues, saturation, or luminance on the image. And you can adjust what exactly you're selecting down here. So I'm going to try and narrow down that hue range so that we're kind of only selecting that jacket. And so we get a little bit of noise out here. And so I'm going to combine this with a power window and just do that power window only over that jacket so that now you can see before and after, we're getting a really good selection just on that. And then we always want everything to be soft. So in this matte finesse panel, in this second, if you hit this 2 button, there's a slider called denoise, and that softens things out really, really nicely. There is a blur radius, but I think the denoise is even cleaner. So now you can see how our selection is looking. I'm just going to hit this highlight button to turn that off and get rid of our clip so we can see it a little bit better. And then we could jump into our saturation and just bring that down. So now, before and after, that jacket's a lot less pingy. Now, there are people online who will say have in their template node tree a qualifier for skin. I try to avoid adjusting skin on every single shot because almost always your film's gonna have people on it, and you most likely do not have time to make that skin adjustment on every single shot. So that's why I like to have, just setting up in DaVinci Wide Gamut, your skin tones are already going to be coming through really well. And so that's why I like to kind of fundamentally set the image up in a way that we're going to render good skin tones automatically. But you can select skin if you need to. So that's where we might go into the color slice tool, which this is also a secondaries tool. It's only selecting certain portions of the image, and use this skin tone slider here. So you could adjust the skin to be more red versus more green, and really find where that feels the best in there. I'm going to jump into the vector scope really quick. The vector scope shows us, I'll just make it, there we go. I'll just make it larger. So this is a color wheel. It shows the saturations of all of our colors in the image. And you can see there's RM blue, oh sorry, B. So that stands for, red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. And so this is just a CMYK color wheel. And if I increase saturation of the image, that wheel is going to get larger. So the farther away from the center it is, the more saturated it is, and the closer to the center it is, the less saturated it is. In here, I'm going to go to our settings really quick and just enable our skin tone indicator. So when we look at skin tones, this is the skin tone line. You may be familiar with the skin tone line. This is under ideal lighting conditions, under like 5500 Kelvin daylight light, where skin tone falls. Now, skin tone can fall in a whole range of places. If you're in a room that is with like illuminated by blue light, your skin tone is going to go over towards blue. And so it's not necessarily like your skin always has to hit the skin tone line in every single shot, but it's a good reference of like, okay, in ideal conditions, somewhere around here is where skin should land. We can see, where that skin is going, and if I do another setting here, which is these 3 dots, and I do display qualifier focus, and then if I open up the qualifier and get our little pin tool, you can see as I'm hovering over the image, I'm getting a dot of where I'm looking. So if I go to her skin, I can see where I'm looking, and it's going pretty much where the skin tone is, maybe a little bit more towards yellow, which I think makes sense for this scene. We're in like kind of a warmer grocery store environment. So I'm totally happy with that, but you can use that as a reference when you're adjusting inside your color slice where that hue is going. You can see it right there. And so that can be helpful with matching shot to shot to shot. If it's like, okay, skin feels good when it's right here on the vector scope, then you can go on to the next shot and adjust the skin to be in a similar spot on the vector scope. I'm just gonna copy this adjustment that we made to this blue coat here, and then I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna paste it on, and because it's such a similar scene, it's still working. Now, this doesn't move around too much, so we're pretty good with where this is at, but let's say the shot, like the camera panned and she was in a different spot on the frame, she would go in and out of this, so you'd be able to see that she was going in and out. So that's what we would use the tracker in Resolve for. And this tracker is great. It feels like magic sometimes when you're using it. I like to uncheck this 3D checkbox because that, if anything is going to throw it off, it's going to be that. I usually just don't have it on at all. But essentially, this is going to analyze those pixels and apply the necessary transformations to keep tracking whatever it's looking at. So if I just track forwards and backwards, it's not that big of a track, but you can see it's locked on with her. Let me see if there's something where I can show you a little bit more. Here we go. So I'm just going to do a little window around her face. And then maybe add a little bit of contrast. Shape out how her face is feeling a little bit. Cool. So let's say we're happy with that adjustment, and then I'm just going to track her. Now, you can see when she goes out of frame, the tracking stops, but you can see how fast that was. It's totally locked onto her. And then what I would do in this situation is, before she walks into the frame, just turn this off. So this is another useful thing to know about. There is, in this tab here, there's this key output gain slider, and that just fades things on and off. So I'm just gonna make a huge adjustment blue just to show you. If I adjust this key output gain, it's changing the opacity of whatever that adjustment is. Right before she steps into it, so right there, we want it on, and I'm gonna do a keyframe. So there's this keyframe panel. This works really similarly to like doing keyframes in Premiere. And essentially I'm going to, you can see what I'm selected on with this corrector 2 right here. I'm gonna add a keyframe, and then I'll go back a few frames to before she steps into it, and I'll add another keyframe. Now right now, both of these keyframes, this output gain is set to 100, but on this first keyframe, I'm just gonna set it to 0. So now it's going to be 0 opacity, and then it fades up to max opacity when she gets into it. Now if she steps into it, it's kind of invisible. That is Windows, selecting a portion of the frame. Our qualifier, where we're selecting things based off of hue, saturation, and luminance, and then our tracker, so that we can keep track of objects. That's like the bread and butter of secondaries. Once you've done that, once you've done your color management, gotten everything into Rec 709, done look development for all your scenes, gone through shot to shot and made sure all of your shots flow into each other, done secondaries to shape the light and make sure the viewer's eye is pointing where you want it to point, you've color graded your movie or whatever, you've color graded your project. So that's kind of the overview of color grading. I've got a few more things to go over, important things to go over, but that is like how to color grade crash course. So let's talk about a little bit about calibration. So you do want, so screens vary so much. Even, I mean, I've been looking at my laptop and then looking up to here, and I've been like, oh my God, it looks so much different up there. Everybody, when they're watching, if they're going to be watching it at home, you have no idea what they're going to be watching it on. But the Rec 709 has like a true standard. And so ideally, if you're doing this, people are paying you to color grade, you want a screen that is calibrated to that standard. And essentially, like, you know, whenever people are watching on their own screens, it'll be wrong, but at least it is wrong by a smaller margin because it's been mastered to your gold standard. The most ideal way is to have a monitor and to calibrate it with a calibration puck like this. It has this little light sensor, and you put it on there, and there's software associated with it, and it'll pop up red, and then it'll see how off your monitor is, and it'll apply a correction in there to make it so that red is displayed correctly on the monitor. And then you need a box like that that plugs into your computer and basically allows Resolve to send your image feed directly to that monitor. So this is the most ideal setup, but just to learn color grading and getting started, you don't need all this stuff. If you have a MacBook or any sort of Apple screen is pretty well calibrated. Windows, it's kind of the Wild West of screen calibrations. So best of luck. I would recommend an external display on a Windows machine, but on a Mac, there's a video that I'll send you guys in this little email package I'm sending about how to get your get this viewer inside of Resolve to adhere to the Rec 709 standard. So that'll be super helpful if you have a MacBook. But if not, I mean, you can still learn color grading, viewing it on an incorrect display. Just know that when you send it to somebody else, it'll probably look different. One more note on this is your environment, like the actual lighting in your room. You want a pretty dark room. Any lights that you want on, you want daylight balance, like you want it to be like a white light. You don't really want warm light because when you are looking at like a warm wall in the background of your monitor or something like that, your eye can get calibrated to that warmth and then you'll be thrown off a little bit. Up here in your settings, you want to turn off night shift, and you want to turn off true tone also. Some laptops have true tone. And you want to set your brightness to about 50% on here, anywhere from like 40 to 60%. It's kind of the ideal range with brightness.
How much speed, like to purchase all of those things?
It's a big range. So like the monitors that we have at Moonshine, we have a monitor that's $30,000. So that is like top spec, yeah, for real. It's like, should I buy a car or should I buy a? For like $2,000, you can get like a very nice professional monitor. This sort of setup, you can get a calibrator for like $130, that box for like $130, and then like a $500 or $600 monitor, and then you're in around $700, and you can get paid to color grade, essentially. I wouldn't buy any of that stuff unless you're getting paid to color grade. On Reddit, there's r/colorists, and they have a little feed that updates with like monitor recommendations and things like that. So that would be your resource for monitor recommendations. Okay, I've got some final global tips. So number one is to start broad with your corrections. So the very broadest things first. Color management, where you're gonna do the same adjustment to every single clip to get it into Rec. 709. And then, doing your look development that applies very broad contrast adjustments to every single shot. Then we get more and more specific into shot-to-shot corrections, and then those secondaries where we're just doing little pieces of the shot. Don't jump in with a secondary and dial in and fix this thing first, because you never know if your color management might fix it or your look development might fix it already, and by the time you get there, you don't even have to worry about it anymore. So I think of it like a painter. You start with a broad brush. You get the things, you get your sky kind of penciled in where it's going to be, and then you get finer and finer into your details as you go on. Color manage. I know it's technical and it's a lot, but once you learn how to do it, it's pretty much just drop it on and it works. And you will have such a better time. All your images will look so much better if you're properly color managed. Collaborate. Your eye, when you're looking at an image for a really long time, you'll start seeing it in a different way. So it's always helpful to show someone else and get other people's opinions and feedback. And people are always gonna have different opinions. Don't be upset if someone doesn't like what you're doing. People have different tastes, but all of those opinions are super helpful. And then going in with that, just taking like 15 minutes to see some sunlight or recalibrate your eyes, and then going back, you'll be like, oh my God, now this looks way too contrasty. If you do that, it'll really, really help a lot. Turn off your lights. So environment, if you have overhead lights on and things like that, your perception will get skewed. And take breaks, which I already said. Go out and get some sunlight and let your eyes adjust. That's my presentation. Now we can just chat. Any questions you guys have?
So this is more like workflow. So most of us know Premiere. How do you want an editor to send it to you?
Yeah, conform is a topic that I didn't go over at all because there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of really helpful resources online of how to do it. There's two ways to do it broadly. You can basically get a hard drive with all the footage and get like an XML out of Premiere and have those link up so that all of the footage is imported in. That can work well, but that can be time consuming because if you have retiming done in Premiere or transitions in Premiere, a lot of the time that stuff doesn't come over the same exact way. So my preferred way is in Premiere, flatten everything down as much as you can, and then just render out the whole movie in ProRes 444. And you can grade ProRes essentially exactly the same way as camera original media. I've done lots of tests side by side. It has to be like 5 or 6 stops underexposed and shot really wrong for the raw to really be helpful. So yeah, just send that ProRes strip, and then you'll send a .edl file, which is an edit decision list, and I can go into Resolve and load that EDL in, and it'll splice up that ProRes Quad 4. So I know that was quick, maybe didn't make sense, but that's like the preferred way to do it is in that ProRes strip.
In the color management, do you have a preference between the LUT and doing the second color space transform?
Yeah, so the color space transform definitely has some limitations, and if you work with it, DaVinci's color science when it comes to that just isn't that great. There's lots of third-party tools, so this is just one, this referent, and I think it has a really nice rendering, and it's easy because it's a LUT, but there's also, in Resolve, there's something called DCTLs, which are essentially third-party plugins, and people make these DCTLs, and you'll see I have a ton of them. But like, there's this one that's JP204099. If I turn that on and off, it does the same thing, but just kind of a different rendering. There's no true like Rec. 709. It just kind of sets you up in that space with some nice corrections done.
You were still using the first color space transform for the camera settings?
Yep, to get into DaVinci Wide Gamut, it works great, but to get to display, it doesn't work as well.
And then you were adding the LUT to the same node? Or you still had a second, like at the beginning it looked like 2 nodes?
Yeah, so that's where,
1 node at one point, I thought.
oh yeah, so that's where I've got the groups in. So this is the clip corrections where I've got the log to DaVinci Wide Gamut. And then in the ones that are affecting the entire group, that's where I have the DaVinci Wide Gamut to 709. But if I go back to that first one that I don't have in a group, this is where you're seeing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this would be color management, but it only affects this clip. You don't get the group functionality.
I know you mentioned you get notes after, but like how is it communicated before? Like the direction? Like what if they wanted to look more like grainy or like, how is that kind of communicated from the director, like the DP to the colorist?
Well, we always ask for any references or resources. You know, I've had people type up a Google Drive doc of like, this is broadly what I want it to be like. This is at different scenes what I want it to be like. I love the more direction I can get, the better. I always start the look development sessions before we start looking at shots. I'm just like, let's ignore the images for a second. Just talk to me about your project and what you want to achieve through your color grading. And that usually answers most questions because it's like, broadly, this is what we're trying to achieve.
Usually like somebody like you, like I guess an editor on set when they're filming so that they can see what's going on and be like, that's not gonna work because this thing moved.
Yeah, that would be like the DIT, a digital imaging technician, is essentially an on-set colorist. You'll see them have a cart and they've got color calibrated monitors and they've got wheels, and they're sometimes, depending on the show, they might make a adjustment for every single shot so that like things already come through balanced. I just blow all that away and redo it because I like to do it under my color management, but that's helpful through the whole edit process. They'll have that baked in where they're seeing more balanced things. But yeah, DIT.
Consistency-wise, if it was a movie, would you just be trying to get the specific scenes to have a lot of consistency, or like, is there a grander consistency throughout a whole film?
Yeah, that's a good question. It really depends. You definitely want a grander consistency throughout the whole film, but one look on like an interior scene might not apply the same way onto the exterior scene. So I just kind of have the same goals as I'm building a look for the interiors. Then I rebuild the look for the exteriors, and I'm like trying to achieve the same things. A lot of times split toning, like if I'm adding some cyan into the shadows, I'm gonna probably do that into every single scene. I have some things to pass around. So there's panels for Resolve that allow you to control, you know, all the controls in here. So this is an example. This is like an older model of one, but this would be like lift, gamma, gain, and you have like these trackballs to be able to control everything. I'll pass it around so that you guys can, it's not too heavy. So you guys can see it and see how it goes. The modern ones look like this. So there's this one that has the wheels, and then there's this one, this is what we use at Moonshine, that have the wheels and it has some displays on there to do a little bit more. All right, I have a few more things. So we talked about calibration. This is from Flanders Scientific. There's pretty much two companies that make top-of-the-line color-accurate monitors. There's Sony, and then there's Flanders. Flanders is actually founded in Atlanta. Their headquarters is here, which is pretty sweet. And if you buy a Flanders monitor, which that $30,000 monitor is a Flanders monitor, you can take it to them, and they'll calibrate it for free, which is pretty cool, forever. And this is the calibration report that you get back. So you can see kind of what that looks like. They'll show you all the different tests that they do and how things are landing. And then I mentioned DCTLs. So when I'm actually doing look development, I'm not really using the curves panel usually. I'm using these third-party plugins. So I just want to like quickly show you like this is how I would typically do split toning. So like if I increase the strength, you can see I'm able to see the curve that it's applying, and I basically get a hue slider if I show my hues so that I can see like this is the hue I'm pumping into the shadows, this is the hue I'm pumping into the highlights. Everything stays smooth and really controlled. So if you're interested in going to that like next level of more professional tools, this is the person who makes that is called Iridescent Color, and I'll send you guys this link also. They're very reasonable. Like that split tone, which I use on every project, is 35 euros. When you check out, it's like $40. So yeah, he has ones that are free. This test image generator is great, and it's free. It's right here. Basically, it'll pull up like a grayscale ramp or middle gray, or you can see all the different colors, and then you can do adjustments and see how it affects different colors, which is great. Like if you are trying out a new LUT or something like that, if you look at it and like if you pull it in and you go onto a grayscale ramp and your LUT is doing this and it's supposed to look like that, you can tell this is going to cause problems in your image. So it can make it easy to diagnose potential issues and stuff like that. But yeah, look through all these. He's got great ones.
You use the shot match feature much when you're working? Like, you know what I'm talking about?
There's like an AI color match tool that'll do that. I think the one in Resolve will just try to use the scopes and make things look pretty much the same, which I've had very inconsistent results with that. This auto button right here, where it auto balances. Is that what you're talking about?
I thought it had it was in a drop down menu like a I don't know if it's right or left click.
Let's see, on the image or on the...
I don't know. This was when I did the guide that they had me use it like a month or so ago.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think there's like an auto where you pull in a still and it'll try to match the look of the still. The only thing I know like that is this auto color balance thing. And like, see, this is, if you do it in a...
It definitely wasn't there, but I honestly don't know well enough to tell you where to look for it.
Okay. I'll look into that, because if there is something like that, it could be really interesting. There's another software, so Resolve is used on most feature films. Its main competitor is called Baselight, and it's just another color grading software, and they have something like that that's like a neural engine that'll color match shots, and it looks really good. Like, it seems like it works really well. So they're kind of on the cutting edge. Resolve will probably copy them at some point.
Does that color grading, the color calibrator thing can work with every kind of screen?
You can put it on any kind of screen. Some monitors are just like not that great of panels, and you may not be able to calibrate it all the way to a specific standard, but you'll be able to get it better. The best thing that you can do is if you have an iPad, iPads are crazy well calibrated, and you can get, here, this will actually be super helpful for you guys. So built into Resolve, I think you have to have the studio version of Resolve, but there's this remote monitor, so it's under workspace and then remote monitoring, and you have all these settings here, and you just hit start, and then it gives you this code, and there's an app on your iPad that's called DaVinci Remote Monitor, and you just pull it up and you copy and paste this code in there, and it'll give you a stream of what you're looking at. And iPads right out of the box have great color accuracy. So that is what I would recommend. There's hope. There's hope. And we always, pretty much always, have our Flanders monitor and then an iPad there just to have an additional reference. Because a lot of people are going to be watching on Apple screens. They're everywhere. It's good to see. And Apple does really good factory calibration. So it's a good reference. Yeah, absolutely. I have a gift. I have a bunch of moonshine stickers. So I'm going to pass them around. There's 3 different ones. Phil, you can take one each. Take as many as you want.